I know, I can still get it. I can get it, so I guess that's right.
Yep. All righty, being recorded. I guess we have to clean it up.
Yeah, whenever you talk to your employees, the first thing I always say is you're on speakerphone, because my wife will be in the room and they'll be going on about something they don't need to be.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I end up using this noise canceling headset again for that same reason. Just two people work in the same area.
Yeah.
Hi, Pete. How are you doing? I didn't see you slip in. Hope you're muted, Pete.
Yes, I am unmuted. I'm good. Under control, maybe.
Yeah. Well, I do find that this is the thing to do is, so since we're not in the big room, the people who are online just chat with each other till Jay gets us going.
Yes.
Looks like Bob's driving to the meeting right now. I see he's on his cell phone.
It's what he's been doing lately. He doesn't know that that's dangerous.
Oh, all right. Yeah. He can hear us,
Don't
though.
know it by now. Don't tell him.
Wow, that's
Okay.
outrageous. That's outrageous.
Hey, Val. How are you doing?
Morning, Jeff.
Good morning, everybody.
That's great.
Yeah, Roger, I was in the Air Force in the 70s, and I went to Switzerland often, and remember about how they spoke German. Almost in the eastern part, or in the I guess it would be the northern part where I was, but I mean it was almost exclusively German.
Right. I noticed that as soon as I landed in Zurich, it was all German speaking and English.
Right.
And then as I worked my way over, about a week and a half later, it was like night and day. I just switched over into French.
Right.
And they even asked us not to speak German. So it sounded like they didn't want to hear any German over there in the western part of Switzerland for some reason.
No, I didn't encounter that. Did they say why? They
just said we're French here.
Okay.
And
so they had
and the food was all French. The people were French speaking, and the whole atmosphere was a little different on the western part.
Yeah, I mean when you go to France, I mean it does totally change.
Yeah, I know. I thought I was in France over by Lake Geneva. I went to a town called Montreux, right on the lake, and all those other little villages around there are all very, very French.
Right. The French in France were much less receptive to American soldiers than the Germans were. And they just did not, they just weren't open, they didn't open their hearts like the rest of like Germany and Austria did.
Right.
And I think that had to do with the fact that, at that time we were there and we were all that were keeping the Russians out. So they loved us.
Right. Exactly. Yep.
Not to mention at that time, they still were in love with the American dollar. When I got there, it was like 4-1,
Right.
against the mark. I mean, you could really do something with a dollar.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I remember drinking in Berlin with some Germans, and they just, and I told them I was a soldier, and they bought me a souvenir mug.
Oh,
You know,
that's so nice. Yes, they were.
yeah, I mean, that was really something to.
All right, so for everyone online, we could hear your conversation. Apologize, we just had to mute you, but throw it in the chat. You guys can keep talking if you want to. All right, so I'll demask so that people can read my lips if that's helpful. Welcome to club meeting. This is a very well attended club meeting today, so thanks everyone for coming. Just as our normal disclaimer, this is being recorded, so everything you say and do online as well as here will be recorded. I'm just letting you know I'm not posting the meeting from last week online. We're not going to do that. I think that everyone can agree for the best of everyone. We want to be respectful.
Well, I missed a good one, huh?
Yeah, you didn't miss anything, Terry. Trust me, you're okay. All right. Well, that being said, we'll get on with the agenda real quick. We've got we did our yell ringing. I should change that. We're gonna go through our pledge, our four-way, and get through some quick announcements. We'll do our fun happy bucks, and then we're gonna run into the program. So it's super exciting today. We'll stand up. Bob, would you be able to lead us in the pledge here today? Would appreciate it.
Where is the flag?
Right there, Bob. We're gonna check your eyes after the meeting.
I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, too. And we'll go on to the quick four-way test before you get seated. Other things we think, Sarah, do.
Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
And
Will it be fun?
all right, you're seated. We'll take those chairs. Wow, there's a lot of good energy today. That makes me feel really good. We have a Rotary Minute, and my guest from my old club in San Francisco is going to come up and hopefully ramble for like, a full 2-3 minutes about Rotary. So, one, welcome. You don't need to click right on things, so you'll be good to go.
Well, thank you, Jay. My name is Ilan. I'm a member of San Francisco Evening Rotary, which Jay used to be a member of. Past president, past assistant governor. I grew up in a Rotary family in Bangladesh. One of the projects that I want to talk about, we do a project called One Heart Thing. And we partner with an organization in San Francisco that work with the senior citizens in San Francisco. And twice a year, daylight saving time, we go and help them with something as small as changing the light bulb, flipping mattress, to snaking the toilet.
The reason why that thing started was to help them change their clocks and the smoke detectors.
Exactly, for the daylight saving time. So that's something small that we can contribute. And we also, with the Senior Tech Center, we also help out with technology. And then we thought that, okay, it'll be really easy. We're going to go and reboot their system and it'll be all. But some of them came up with the question, how do you recover deleted Dropbox files? And we're like, okay. Yeah, so that's the fellowship. So thank you, Jay, for having me here, and great to meet you guys. And if you guys come to San Francisco, Rotary Club of San Francisco Evening, come check us out.
They're an evening club. It's a drinking club with a Rotary column. Thank you, Alon. And I do want to give a shout out to that club. They do some amazing work, and there's someone who you'll read about often in Rotary Magazine who's a member and the founder of that club, whose name is Danielle Lallemand. So she's a pretty phenomenal person and the current governor of that district. Well, we have a few guests today, so please, if you want to introduce guests, Joanne, you got a guest to introduce?
Yes, I've got Ginger back, or Suzanne Ginger back with me this time, and or Debra. Well, she wants to promote the shelter box.
Awesome.
So she went to the Estes Park Rotary Club up there, had a big fundraiser over the weekend, and she got roped into actually working. So she's done Rotary service this week.
And the foundation just wrote a check for a shelter box.
The foundation, yes.
Yeah,
the foundation
we know
wrote
what you guys do.
Yeah.
Well,
So thank you, Suzanne.
Wonderful. Next guest, we have John. So John, do you want to introduce?
probably no introduction needed. John Stringfellow, I think this is like the fifth visit. Just about, yeah. He's interested in joining our club soon.
Yeah, he's halfway through the process. So congrats. Welcome back, John.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Any more non-speaker guests? Well, we're gonna introduce our speakers and our check recipients in a moment. But okay, well let's move forward and we'll do that in line. Real quick, I just wanted to hear from Joe real quick how the Isabel Road cleanup went out.
Well, we got one completely full bag of garbage and one half bag full of recycle. Her, Leslie Bennett, her son, Mary Beth, and I walked almost the whole stretch to 287 and back, and pretty clean, probably because it hasn't been driven on for quite some time because of the construction at 287. We'll do it again in the spring, and then if it's still really tight, we'll find a new stretch of road.
Wonderful. Awesome. Thanks, Joe. Appreciate that. We did want to give you an update because some people don't know, but Lou and Jim had resigned as of last week, so they're no longer members of our club. We're not going to talk about it, but I'm just letting you know because not everyone.
Well, you spelled Jim's last name wrong.
I did, yeah. All right. So another update, our Road Rat Club that we interact with here in Boulder is based out of the university, and they do have a meeting this evening. So if you're interested, it would be great to have one club member that would show up. I know Marty's expressed interest, Ann's expressed interest, so if anyone's able to go tonight, it's going to be 6 to 7 at Hill 230 Science Building there. And then they won't have another meeting for 2 weeks, but if anyone's able to go, they always love to have someone pop in and represent the club, what we're up to. And bring news back to us also, would be great. Anyone able to go this time? All right.
I can't go, but I've been in communication with him. He's going to give me a report tomorrow.
Okay, perfect. That's great. Awesome. Thank you so much, Marty. All right. Well, we're going to start with Happy Bucks here, and then we'll move on to our guest program and our guest check recipient. Happy Bucks for, I think everyone here knows what Happy Bucks are, so we're just going to skip the intro. Anyone have some Happy Bucks they want to spread joy to today? All right.
I'll start. I had a birthday Saturday.
Uh-oh.
So this is a really large yes.
$43 isn't so bad.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Anyway, it was a really, really good day. My birthday check too, and I rounded up so nobody knows I'm 78. And I have a grumpy dollar because my surgery's been postponed until October 22nd, but then I'll be okay.
Well, thank you again for such hospitality, and I'm traveling all around the state, so great to be here.
Yeah.
It's his first time in Colorado.
Yeah. He'll be
He
back.
got my last Palisade Peach last night, so he
It was still good. Okay.
I had such a good time with the Estes Park Rotary Club over the weekend, helping out with the autumn gold events, and that lots of very, very friendly people were great stories. And then even ran into some of those Estes Park members while we were out beekeeping yesterday, and some of us here will walk on the road. So,
I spent the last 5 days traveling around northern New Mexico and visited some pueblos and some ruins. And
very cool.
it's nice. It's not very far away. You can feel like you're in a foreign country.
yes, that's true. I'm just happy.
Leaf peeping this afternoon. Hopefully it won't be too dreary, and then taking my son out to dinner.
I dragged my husband to Oklahoma City and to see the Pioneer Women's Empire. It was so much fun. We had a wonderful time. Wonderful people there. So.
I heard it's okay out there.
It is. 39 tribes. I didn't know that.
That's where my family came
Well, that's
from.
really good. Really?
Yeah.
That's very
From
cool.
East, yeah, from West Cherokee.
And Oklahoma City was awesome. It was beautiful. That river walk. And
That's where the people from Boulder, the indigenous, were
relocated.
Relocated.
Several years.
Oh.
Dave, yeah. Dave was there.
Oh,
Yeah,
I gotta find
he
out.
was there at NOAA.
Oh, okay.
So $2. I'm thrilled that Matt is here because he's my adopted son. And I just wanted to mention that Indigenous Peoples' Day is coming up, and one of the people that we're thinking about for a grant is Luna Couture, and they have a presentation, and it's on our Facebook page if you want the information. But it's kind of interesting. So.
I'm just happy to be anywhere. I'm glad I don't live in Oklahoma. The people are great. Tulsa's better than Oak City. But the climate sucks.
If you'd ever like to go back to the 50s, go to Walden, Colorado.
Yeah.
That's 1850s.
Where is?
There you go. Take a
Down
note.
south.
North part, almost Wyoming.
Oh.
I'm glad I'm not still living in the south side of Chicago. I'm happy we had a great turnout Saturday for the road cleanup.
Oh, I forgot
Happy we
about
have
that.
a great turnout for today's meeting.
Matt, if you could pass that to Mary Beth, that'd be great. Hey there. If you want to take a seat right by Rusty here, we'll introduce you in just a moment. All right. Well, thank you for Happy Bucks. We got a full cup today, so thanks for feel good. Oh, Terry, we'll pass it on. Terry, what's your Happy Buck?
Well, last week I was back in Wyoming, so I went to with my colleague Diana, Little America. And we got together a long while, obviously, and you could only go if you were vaccinated. And so it was kind of combination of retreat, fellowship, and all that stuff. So.
Hey, Dave, do you have a Happy Buck? Because you just unmuted. You can unmute yourself.
Well, I'm actually pretty happy that I'm going to be heading off on 2.5 weeks of vacation here starting tomorrow and going up to Glacier National Park, provided that we don't shut down the government.
Well, we can all be jealous now.
Yeah.
I just want to say, because Dave, with his dues, Dave put in $50 into his dues check. So that is a possibility for those of you online.
How many are online today?
Yeah. that's a good
I
idea.
tried to count, but I messed up here.
No worries. We've got Dave, we've got Angie, we've got George, we've got Val, we got Pete, we've got.
Oh,
We got Bob.
Yeah.
No, Bob.
Neither, we've got all the Bobs here. I don't know. Bob Groening, that's it. It just says Bob's iPhone. It could be one of you too, right?
Yeah.
Well, welcome, everybody.
Yes.
All right. Well, I would love to have Matt come up. And you're wearing the same shirt, so it's like as if I just took this photo.
Yeah.
So Matt, we wanted to have you come in, let you know that we awarded you our literacy award for the year, and very excited to be able to present this to you today and give you a moment to tell us a little bit about what you've been up to, how your project and your organization's doing, and educate people who may not know about it. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you guys. I always love coming back here and seeing you. I was a member for about a year back in 2018. I really appreciate this award. This is probably the first award that Generation Exchange has ever received, so that's pretty special to me. If you don't know about Generation Exchange, we're a nonprofit. We give free technology help, usually to older adults, but we really don't have an age requirement. Our help is given by wonderful college student volunteers, usually at universities. So the way our workshops go is we have people come in, ask questions about phones, laptops, tablets. They work with a volunteer one-on-one for about an hour and a half, and then at the end, the roles switch. And so the younger student volunteer can now ask them for anything that they need help with, be it life advice, career advice, business connections. So it's we really try to make it a mutually beneficial exchange. So thank you very much. Yeah.
How do you recover a deleted file from a drop?
We have some workshops coming up. COVID shut us down for a while. We ended up going to Zoom, but we're actually having an in-person workshop this Saturday at CU and in Fort Collins next Saturday. And then we'll have some pretty cool things coming up in November. We got another Zoom workshop. Some people actually prefer those over in person because it's kind of nice to just be able to screen share and not look over people's shoulder and be in the comfort of your own home with a glass of coffee or a cup of coffee. And we've also had an idea that I'm going to implement coming up pretty soon. We have this weird thing where our volunteers actually sign up faster than the people who need technology help. And a big reason of that is because they appreciate that role switch so much. They appreciate the wisdom and the perspective, and the experience, and just being able to really learn from, an older person who's just experienced so much more life than them. So it's a really, really cool part of, our organization. We've been going for about 3 years now that, we have actually like doubled the amount of volunteers. So if you guys have any ideas on ways we can reach more people who need technology help, who would be a good fit for this program, please let me know, because that would be awesome.
What is your connection, if any, with the group at CU?
The CU Rotaract, they are volunteers.
No, not the Rotaract, but the computer help. My wife is retired.
The Boulder Library?
No, it's through CU. Information system people.
Yeah, we get volunteers. We put like posters up in all the buildings at CU that have computer related.
Do you rent space or you get space at CU?
Yeah, we get space for free. Just have a classroom that we use.
Awesome. But you're not then associated with. Sounds like you don't know about the group that services staff and.
Yeah, the OIT, is that what it's called?
Yeah, I work in the building next to it.
Yeah, no, I mean, we'd love to be connected formally. Yeah, that would be great.
Okay, well, we've got help there.
Yeah. And I know that's a really good program. We also have, just to finish my thought, because we've had such a good response from this role switch part, the exchange, the college students. What we're going to do, I've been really wanting to do what we're calling a reverse workshop. So instead of tech help being the focus, actually having the young adults who are in college, in high school, come in directly for mentoring from anybody in the community who wants to, help them out with their careers or their life. And, COVID's been a tough time for young people. I know it's been tough for everybody, but, from what I've been seeing, it's really affected, socially. College has been really weird, and they really, really, really appreciate even the smallest little bit of advice or tidbit that they can take along with them as they go through their journey. So if this is interesting to you guys, as always, talk to me afterwards. I'm always happy to get you connected.
So I know Windows 11 is coming out pretty soon. Are you telling people to upgrade, and what is it going to do for people? I haven't figured it out.
Is that a real question?
Yeah, that's a real question.
I always wait personally. It's really a personal preference. I got Mac, PC, everything. So I usually wait a little bit. Don't jump to the first update, but that's just me. There's people that say you should always update and it's going to be more secure and less bugs, but it's really a preference. So if you like what you're operating in right now, I'd say sit with that for a little bit, because a lot of times when you update, it can be completely different. But if you're comfortable with it and you're excited for the new features, update.
Before Ann speaks, I have to say, I think that it sounds like a lot of people here might be interested in working with Generation Exchange.
Oh yeah, we've had people. Yeah,
One of the problems, I keep telling my husband that he should go to one of your workshops, because I called him my little millennial because he's always on his phone. Get him out of that.
No, I can't help
There's
with
a
that.
farm out in Washington, and they'll take it away, Sam.
There's an app for
If
that.
you have a glass of water, just put his phone in the glass of water.
Could you talk about CU Rotaract and their involvement with you?
Oh yeah, we are connected with CU Rotaract. A couple of their volunteers are signed up to be mentors at our next workshop, and they're great group of kids. I don't know them too well, but I'm excited to get to know them more as the year goes on. It's just nice to be semi back to normal and being able to do things in person, online also. So
Yeah, you had your hand up.
Oh, I was just gonna ask why astronauts use Linux.
I think it's because it's the least most programmable.
I can't open Windows in space.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. Really appreciate it. And
Glad to do this workshop. Well, now I think a lot of people hearing that we're gonna have an opportunity here in Boulder, maybe you can tell your spouses, and maybe you can put it on your own calendar, depends on what your interest is in this. So thank you so much, Matt. With that said, we do have a program today, and Bill, I don't know if you're doing the introduction today.
Yeah, I've got.
Wonderful. So we'll let Bill do an introduction, but excited to have a new guest.
So it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today. David McPherson is Associate Professor of Philosophy at Creighton University in Omaha. He's currently on sabbatical as a visiting research professor at the CU Boulder at the Benson Center, where he's working on his third book titled Spiritual Alienation and the Quest for God. He works in the areas of virtue ethics, political philosophy, meaning in life, and philosophy of religion. He is the author of The Virtues of Limits. David and his wife, Kirsten, enjoy playing traditional folk music together and spending time with their 4 children, Claire, John, Peter, and Andrew. He is originally from Minneapolis, and he earned his PhD from Marquette University in Milwaukee. So welcome, David.
You have the cover image.
I didn't get it before we set the slide deck up this morning.
Is there a way
I can get it brought up. I can pull it up in email.
Can I come up there?
Yeah, please. We've got cameras here. There are people. It is being recorded too, just so you know.
Great.
Yeah.
I was gonna talk. Thanks so much for having me. It's great. I've never been at a Rotary Club meeting. This is my first time.
Oh, congratulations.
Let's grab a few pages. These are the proofs of my new book, The Virtues of Limits, which are due actually today. I didn't get as much sleep as I might have liked, but
we keep all the coffee with them.
Yeah.
Don't drop them.
It's files. These is what I printed off to read for myself. So. Well, it's been great to be here, and we're actually living in Denver. We have to find a furnished house with for 4 young kids, ages 1 through almost 9. And I don't know if you know this, but Denver and Boulder is more expensive than maybe Omaha, for instance. So
that's recent
challenge. Yeah.
Working on it. I got a D full screen the other one real quick.
Okay.
Apologize about that.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
How were you appointed, or because it's a 1-year appointment?
Yeah, so I applied. So actually, I knew the director of the Benson Center. His name is Dan Jacobson. He used to be at the University of Michigan, and he.
Will that work for you?
Yeah, it's great. That'll just be nice. Give an image. Yeah, so this is by Impressionist painter Alfred Sisley. I was looking for kind of path and fence image because the book is The Virtues of Limits. That was the title. So the fence is actually quite faint, but I did like this, how you have the path kind of leads to this village abode there in the background. One of the arguments in the book is that limits help us to be at home in the world as far as humanly possible. So so back to your question about how to get appointed. So actually knew the director. He's a new director. I think came in 2 years ago now. So he used to be at the University of Michigan, where he ran this heterodox philosophy, moral and political philosophy workshop. So you may know that the academy tends to be highly sort of dominated by, let's say, one ideological point of view. And I think there are some, people who want to try to make it more sort of intellectually diverse. And so I think the Benson Center is part of that initiative. The project I'm working on there is not itself particularly political. It's called Spiritual Alienation, the Quest for God. So I'll just say maybe something, sorry, I started talking, I didn't get to, so I applied, there's an application. So I was on sabbatical through Creighton. So Creighton is a Jesuit Catholic school in Omaha, Nebraska, like Regis in Denver. So there's now, there used to be 28, there's now 27. Wheeling Jesuit bit the dust, unfortunately. Such is the landscape of higher education. It's getting more and more challenging, I think. So we get a semester sabbatical at Creighton. You can also apply for fellowships. It's not easy to find many fellowships in philosophy. It's not a very lucrative profession. The sciences and things like that get a little bit more support. But so anyways, the Benson Center, I knew Dan, and so it was a good fit. So my project is not particularly political, but it's concerned with Western civilization. So I actually begin in this book, Spiritual Alienation, the Quest for God, reflecting on philosophically on the story of Adam and Eve in Genesis, or how does that speak to the spiritual alienation, or the sense of not at homeness that is sort of perennial to the human condition. So I talk about sort of there's three kinds of forms of spiritual alienation. One is self-alienation, where we're sort of alienated from ourselves with a divided will. There's alienation from others, and then there's also alienation from the world. And I think that's also been sort of exacerbated or made worse within certain conditions of modernity. I won't go too far in that, but so that's the book project I'm currently working on, although I'm working on getting this other one to press, the Virtues of Limits. So I thought I'd talk about that. But a lot of my work is focused on the question of what is it to live well in the conditions in which we find ourselves. So how do we live the good life? So a lot of my research has been focused in an area called virtue ethics. So this goes back to Aristotle, one of the great Greek philosophers, as probably many of you know. And virtue ethics is a kind of ethics that focuses on character. What kinds of people should we become, right? So ethics isn't just about the actions we do on Aristotle's view, but rather it's about the kind of people we want to become. So it's about more holistic in the sense it's about living a good life. It's about living the good life, we might say, right? And how should we conceive of that? And so my first book was called Virtue and Meaning. That came out with Cambridge early 2020, beginning of the pandemic. And that was trying to deal with the problem of disenchantment, or the modern problem of disenchantment, where there's this kind of fear with the rise of modern science that we've lost maybe this sort of threatened loss of meaning in our lives. And so a lot of virtue ethicists have tried to recover a sense of value or goodness in the world. And so I developed this account of human beings as meaning-seeking animals, that if we're going to live well, we have to live well as meaning-seeking animals. So this second book, which is a shorter book called The Virtues of Limits, that I want to focus on today, is also dealing with this question of what is it to live well, and particularly looking at one of the facets of modern life is what I call the Promethean tendency. So at Creighton, I teach pretty regularly bioethics. So these sort of issues come up in bioethics, for instance, in discussions around genetic engineering or gene editing. But I wanted to develop an account of the importance of limits throughout human life. What role do limits play in a good human life, right? So that's really my focus. And of course, we live in a culture where we hear, especially among college students, there's messages we give about, have boundless aspirations, right? Don't regard yourself as having any limits, right? See yourself as transcending limits. many respects, that's important. It's part of being human that we seek to transcend limits. It's part of how we achieve what's best in our humanity is precisely by pushing ourselves, right, to go maybe beyond our limitations, right? And so I think that is something important about human beings. But it's also true that if we don't recognize certain limits, we can also find ourselves dehumanized in certain ways, or that we fail to achieve certain important human goods, and we maybe fail to prevent certain bads or evils, right? And so, how do we get right this kind of this sort of a paradox in human life that it seems like we need to transcend limits, but we also need to respect limits, right? So how do we get that right? And so I developed an account of original account of what I call the limiting virtues. So the virtues of limits sort of has the title here has this double meaning. One sort of broadly speaks to the benefits of acknowledging limits in our lives, right? But more specifically, it refers to my account of the limiting virtues, right? And so identify and focus on 6 virtues. Humility is the first. I call it the master limiting virtue. Reverence, moderation, contentment, neighborliness, and loyalty. So I'll talk about each of those sort of briefly, and then I would like to have some time for discussion and hearing some of your thoughts on this topic. So I talk about these limiting virtues, these 6 limiting virtues across 4 domains of life, right? So I really what I'm trying to do is articulate a vision of the good life in which limits have an integral role to play, or recognition or respect for limits has an integral role to play. The first domain is what I call existential limits. So existential limits is a fancy term, but it really comes from the existing world, the world as it is. We might call it the given world, right? What is our relationship, or what should our relationship be to the world as it is, the given world, right? And here I talk about 2 fundamental, what I call existential stances. There's the choosing, controlling stance, which we all take up when we try to make our lives better, right? We can also call this a transforming stance. Whenever we try to better our lives, we take up this choosing, controlling stance to try to make things better. At the extreme, though, it becomes a Promethean project, right? Where we seek to, as sometimes people put it, play God, right? And so when we do this, we seek a kind of unlimited mastery over the world, right? This is something people worry about a lot, for instance, in environmental ethics and in bioethics, a lot of areas, you can see a concern about this Promethean tendency. Now, some people take it up sort of whole hog and they think this is great. This is precisely, playing God is precisely what we should do. So for instance, I talk about the philosopher Nietzsche, who proclaimed the death of God and says, we ourselves have to become gods, become worthy. What he meant by the death of God was just that he thought that we couldn't believe in God anymore. Now, of course, lots of people believe in God and do so thoughtfully. And so, that's a contested point to Nietzsche. But the point I focus on is that he thinks we need to play God, right? And then we also see this in advocates of genetic engineering, who say precisely what we should be doing is seeking to not be passive to nature, but sort of grab the reins of the evolutionary process and sort of make ourselves as godlike or as possible. So then people talk about this as transhumanism, right? So the other stance stands opposed to that, which I call the accepting, appreciating stance. So there's a choosing, controlling stance and the accepting, appreciating stance. So the accepting, appreciating stance says we have to first accept that some things as given and appreciate them for what they are. Right? It's not to say that we shouldn't take up the choosing, controlling stance, but it informs how and when we do so. Right? And so I try to argue for the primacy of the accepting, appreciating stance. Okay, so based on that kind of that sort of limits at the most general level, I go in to look at moral limits, including, for instance, absolute prohibitions, how we think about character formation, begins from limiting our desires or restraining our desires and giving form to them. Also, how should we think about sort of the duties of assistance that we owe to others? Are there actually limits on those? And then I go into sort of political limits, where I talk about patriotism versus cosmopolitanism, How do we think about distributive justice? I argue for a sufficientarian account, which is that what's important is that people have enough to live well. And then I talk about kind of make an argument against utopianism and an argument in favor of moderation and what I call politics of imperfection. And then I get into the last chapter on economic limits, where I discuss sort of the problem of greed and the importance of contentment in our economic lives. How do we have our economic lives be lived in a way that can help us be at home in the world? So I developed a vision that I call home economics, not the old school course, but actually the term economics comes from a Greek term, oikonomia, which means sometimes translated as household management. So oikos is sort of the home or the household, right? So the attempt here is to put the oikos back in oikonomia, into economy, right? That our economic lives have been detached from the question of home. What is it to be at home in the world, to contribute to the common good? So partly kind of in tongue in cheek, I developed this idea of home economics. Economics should be oriented towards the home, not causing alienation or not in homeness, we might call that, but rather helping us to be more at home in the world. And then I end with a discussion of the Sabbath. The Sabbath, so I try to make a case for the Sabbath, whatever someone's religious beliefs, that Sabbath has a really important role in human life. In fact, our work is not really complete without our appreciation of it in the world in which we live. So those of you who may be familiar with Jewish and Christian understandings of the Sabbath, it imitates God in creation, where God completes the creation. This, the Genesis account of creates the world in 6 days, but then completes it on the seventh day by resting and appreciating it, right? So there's a sense in which our achievements themselves are not really complete without our appreciation of them, right? And in fact, it comes to acknowledgement with the imperfections of the world, that we can't play God, that we need to rest, that we need to appreciate the world around us, be at home in the world amidst its imperfection. And so it's really a kind of culminating point of the book, that this kind of I call it a Sabbath orientation, that our lives need to be not as a mere, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel says that the Sabbath is not a mere armistice, but rather it's sort of the ultimate telos of creation. It's not just a kind of ceasing from activity, from the real business of life, in order to rest for a little bit, to recharge, but rather it's the end, what the Greeks call the telos, right? It's the fulfillment of all of our working and striving and longing, that in that kind of restful appreciation of our lives, of the people we share it with, of the work that we're doing, of the world around us, this is where our sort of ultimate fulfillment comes. Of course, Aristotle also gave a sort of argument about this with regard to leisure and contemplation, sort of the pinnacle existence. Again, leisure is not just kind of like watching Netflix and just shutting off your brain, but rather it's engaging in sort of intrinsically valuable activities for their own sake, taking a break from all those attempts to achieve status, to achieve control over the world, where we just accept and appreciate the world for what it is. Okay, so that's a kind of quick overview of the book. Let me just real quickly describe each of the limiting virtues, and I'd be interested just to hear some of your thoughts, or if you have questions. Obviously, I'm trying to summarize the book pretty quickly here. But it is a fairly short book. It's just a 4-chapter book. So let me just talk about each of the limiting virtues. So first of all, humility. I said humility is the master limiting virtue. It ensures that we recognize and live out our proper place in the scheme of things. It is especially concerned with reining in that Promethean tendency to play God and seeking mastery over the given world, which again, I think is a prominent tendency in the modern world, seen especially in a certain scientific technological mindset. The virtue of humility recognizes that some things must be accepted as given and not subject to human control or manipulation. It properly acknowledges our dependence on others and on the natural world, as well as on values not of our own making, for living well and meaningfully as human beings. The virtue of humility also properly recognizes our natural, personal, and moral limitations. You can see why I call it the master limiting virtue. It's particularly concerned with acknowledging limits, right, in sort of a broad sense. I also connect it with the virtue of reverence. Sometimes these are actually seen as almost like equivalent, but I think reverence is focused on first that which is reverence worthy, and which sets certain limits on our will. In fact, I think it helps us to define our proper place in, as I put it, in the scheme of things, right? And sort of, by the scheme of things, I just mean sort of our place in the world, right? Reverence helps us to know that we are not God or gods. Rather, we're, situated somewhere, as Aristotle said, we're situated somewhere between the beast and the divine, right? Maybe we have an element of the divine within us, as that's how Aristotle puts it, or in the Jewish and Christian traditions, speak about being in the image of God. So we may be in the image of God, but we're not God, right? And so reverence sort of closely connects with humility for that reason. I think it also helps us to recognize certain kinds of absolute prohibitions, certain things that are never to be done, certain fundamental limits on the will. For instance, in regard to human beings, as having a special dignity, or we might even say a sanctity, we acknowledge certain fundamental limits on our will, right? That puts sort of brakes on any attempt, on sort of attempt at mastery just over other people, right? Sometimes environmentalists also say there's something sacred about nature that we need to respect, right? So any kind of recognition of the sacred or the reverence worthy is something that reverence focuses on. Moderation, the third limiting virtue, is concerned with avoiding vicious extremes. So Aristotle's account of the virtues, really for Aristotle, moderation was the master virtue, because he saw the virtues of character as a mean between excess and deficiency in some action. So sometimes people refer to this as the golden mean. So for instance, courage is a mean between the excess of fear, which would be cowardice, and the deficiency of fear, which would be a kind of rashness. Or generosity is the virtue that's a mean between a kind of wastefulness in giving and a kind of stinginess, which would be deficiency in giving, right? And so on and so forth, with all the virtues. So I focus on moderation in character education with temperance, which is a kind of learning to restrain our desires, to temper them, in order to make us able to open to what's truly noble, what's truly worthwhile that we should pursue in our desires. And I also talk about moderation. So there's moderation as temperance, but there's also moderation, since it's concerned with avoiding vicious extremes. I defend political moderation, which I think is a needed virtue in today's highly polarized age. So puts limits on the sort of polarization tendencies, helps us, I think helps to cultivate sort of ethic of dialogue across different points of view, avoid sort of ideological purity tests and that sort of thing. It generally is, is concerned with moderating those political passions. The virtue of contentment, I think, is a very important virtue. It's a virtue of, as I put it, of knowing when enough is enough, being properly satisfied, of not needing not wanting more than is needed for a good life, right? I think it's a particularly important virtue in our day and age. I think it's important for being at home in the world amidst imperfection, to say it's good enough. What we're searching is not a perfect condition. This is part of my anti-utopianism, but which I think actually ends up being sort of hostile to the given world. But rather, it's a way. It's not saying we should just not seek improvement. That's part of it. But we also need to find a way to be at home in the world amidst imperfection. Neighborliness is, I think, this is my fifth limiting virtue. 2 more to go. Neighborliness is a very, people don't often talk about neighborliness as this in philosophy, we talk about neighborliness as a virtue, but of course, within our cultural tradition, coming from Judaism and Christianity in the West particularly, but also beyond, I think you find something equivalent. Neighborliness comes out obviously out of the sort of biblical teachings about love of neighbor. And neighborliness, as I understand, is a form of human solidarity that recognizes the significance of proximity, right? So a lot of modern forms of ethics like utilitarianism, which seeks to promote the greatest happiness for the greatest number, or the philosopher Immanuel Kant, so famous, his ethics are called Kantianism. And he has stated that we should will something to be a universal law. And so in both cases, we see a kind of impartiality, sort of appeal to the universal, which I think is important. That's an important part of ethics. But oftentimes what they neglect is the role of partiality in human life, that we live in relationships of partial attachment to friends, to family, to fellow citizens, right? So how do we properly balance those concerns, those universal and particular concerns? And I think a lot of those modern forms of moral philosophy, just emphasizing partiality, really lose something crucial. So a lot of more ancient forms of ethics, like Confucianism, for instance, begins, says that filial piety is the root of all goodness, right? Or you might think of the biblical teaching of honoring your father and mother, or Aristotle spent more time on the topic of friendship than any other topic, right? So these are all sort of emphases on the particular, right? And so neighborliness, I think, is one way to sort of recognize the particular, but it also recognizes the universal. I think you see this in the parable of the Good Samaritan, when Jesus asks, "Who is my neighbor?" Right? And he says, the person who, the Samaritan who helps, the wounded Jew on the side of the road. Again, there's conflicts between those groups, right? It's not a member of the community, right? So it's any human being who we happen to come across, right? So it is universal in one sense, but it's also particular because it's the person who's there before us. G.K. Chesterton, some of you may know G.K. Chesterton. He talked about there's a great wisdom shown in the biblical teachings on love of neighbor, because we have to love the person who's there. He says a much more alarming reason for a much more serious occupation. We're probably all aware of the people who love humanity in general, but love no one in particular. Dickens had a great, in Bleak House, this telescopic eyes of Mrs. Jellyby, who sort of looks to far off causes, but ignores the people right around her, right? Sometimes it's easier to love an abstraction of humanity than to love concrete human beings, because we're imperfect. Others and ourselves are imperfect, right? So we can have kind of high-minded ideals of humanity, right? But actually hate actual human beings, so that's a problem. So neighborliness is a virtue that sort of is concerns ourselves with concrete humanity. So once we show this concern or have this love for the people who are there in our lives, we're also going to form bonds of loyalty, right? Loyalty is a binding attachment to some particular people and not to others. It puts restraints on our attachments, right? Aristotle said a friend to all is a friend to none, right? We can't, we're limited, we're placed, we have so much time, we have so much sort of energy and so forth, right? We're place limited creatures, and so loyalty, has an important role to play in identifying to whom should we have these bonds of attachment. I think loyalty gives a kind of grateful recognition to the goods we've received in human relationship, in friendship, in family life, among fellow citizens, and sustains those relationships. Again, this goes against sort of the impartialist framework that says, we should just always be looking to maximize the greatest good for the greatest number. Utilitarian ethics, for instance, has famously had a difficulty dealing with, our particular attachments. Right? Should you give your kids birthday presents, if there are people who, need food in another country? Well, that's something you have to balance. How do you balance, these bonds of loyalty along with what we owe to human beings as such? I also talk about the idea of a loyalty to the given world. That the world, existing value, the value that exists in the world, makes demands upon us for loyalty, for belonging. And we fail to be sort of properly responsive by not belonging and being loyal to this world rather than the world we think we should have, right? Some other possible world, right? Well, this is the world we have, and we can take, either reject it and say, I don't like it. I want some other one, and be perpetually alienated, or we can say, no, this is the world. This is what's given to me. I'm going to love what is and try to bring about the good as far as I can, and seek to be at home and as far as I can. So that kind of loyalty, what I call loyalty to the given, I think structures and gives context to all of our other particular loyalties. And so, all right, so that's a rough overview, but I'd be interested to hear your thoughts or questions you might have. Yeah.
I have two.
Yeah.
The first one, how do you think the COVID pandemic has impacted the virtues you just talked about?
Yeah.
And then the second one is related to your mention of meaning.
Yeah.
In the first part of your talk. Did you read or know, I'm sure you do, about Viktor Frankl?
Yeah, yeah.
And his wonderful writing on meaning,
Yeah.
And did you use any of that in your work?
Yeah. So the book is called, I think it's called Man's Search for Meaning,
Yes,
right?
Man's
So
Search for
about
Meaning.
his experience of the Holocaust, right? I wouldn't say, I mean, I didn't appeal to it directly, but I think I read that book actually in undergrad, and it had a really big influence on me. So did some of you may know the novelist Dostoevsky. His book, The Brothers Karamazov and Others, talks about, you know, that human beings have need. I mean, one of the things was, you know, in the Grand Inquisitor, and this is in Dostoevsky, you know, sort of this inquisitor sort of is like inquisiting Jesus and saying like, why did you give human beings freedom? And like, we should just give them bread and make them happy, right? But human beings need something more than just sort of their material needs fed, so to speak, right? They also have spiritual needs, right? What we may call, I'm sort of using spiritual broadly here to mean needs for meaning, right? And I think that's also true in, you know, Viktor Frankl, the people who were able to make it through, well, I mean, whether they made it through or not was highly contingent, but the people who didn't despair and maybe, you know, even commit suicide were those that had some kind of hope or sense of meaning, right? So that really, I think, informs my first book, Virtue of Meaning, that to really understand what is it to live well, we have to see ourselves as the meaning-seeking animal, right? And this also informs, so the accepting, appreciating stance, for it to be valid, there has to be things of value in the world that we can appreciate, right? And that sort of structures then our choices, right? And how we live our lives. In fact, without that, I think we have a kind of debilitating condition of why care about anything, right? And so I think that accepting, appreciating stance is needed to, first of all, appreciate what's of value or what's meaningful. So I would say that's sort of it's informed broadly over the years my thinking of this, the importance of this question of meaningfulness in human life. On the question of the COVID pandemic, I do think it's very interesting. There are certain kinds of illusions of control that I think we have. It's not, so I think it's one of these areas where I think we can see these two, what I call existential stances, the choosing, controlling, and the accepting, appreciating. Now, I'm not saying we should necessarily appreciate. There might be some silver linings in COVID, but so that there's a danger, I think, of just accepting and like not doing anything, and so you can kind of see where you might go too far in a kind of like accepting, which just accept what comes and don't do anything, don't take any precautions, right? There's also this sort of other side of the spectrum, which is this idea that sort of that we can control everything. If we just controlled everything, then then everything would be all right? And really a kind of sense of, a kind of existential crisis that there are things that are beyond our control, right? I think that's sort of a deeper underlying lurking fear, is that there are things maybe we can't fully control, right? I think it sort of bursts some of those illusions, sort of illusions of grandeur that human beings, we can control everything, right? And so, I think I would say broadly, I think just on those kind of basic existential stance, I think it kind of highlights the tension between them, and that we can't control everything, but we should do our best to mitigate and but still find the good in the world amidst everything. But so I would say that's sort of one of the things that sort of come most to light. I do think it's interesting. I have kind of become more interested just in how certain kind of class dynamics play into sort of COVID responses, and certain what people call the elites of society that who don't usually have to work, jobs, the sort of what we call the essential workers, right? They're sort of at home. They seem to adopt this stance more and more strongly, right? While sort of the quote unquote essential workers, right? Maybe not quite as much. So like what's going on in those sort of different, sort of parts of society, right? And the sort of tensions that we see come out between them. I don't know. I think there's a lot, to reflect upon still. But I have kind of thought about these two stances, the choosing, controlling, and accepting, appreciating. How do we get that right? There's also a way in which you have to live your life, like you can't just, there's lots of, things that could kill us every day, I mean, and, truth be told, we're all going to die. Now, one of the sort of projects within, people really aspiring to within genetic engineering is, the project of immortality. Could we find a way to sort of eradicate disease? And would, in fact, that be a good thing, right? If the ultimate disease here would be our mortality, if we could find a way to end the aging process, to crack the code, so to speak, would we want that, right? Would we want to live forever on this, what used to be, as Shakespeare put it, a mortal coil, the immortal coil now, right? That's different from a question maybe a religious afterlife. It's sort of a wholly kind of different sort of condition. Sort of set that aside. I think that's an interesting question. I think in some ways we have these kinds of illusions maybe that we could just extend our life a little further. We could be in control, right? And again, I'm not against, concern for health, but how do we sort of also live in a way that's healthy in a broader spiritual sense? We were earlier talking about young people really struggling, right? I think a lot today. Young people are already struggling with sort of disconnections and all the pressures they were feeling. It's the social media age and all those sort of things. I mean, rates of depression are through the roof. People on medication and suicide numbers going up, all those sort of things. So like, how do we get it right? This is the question there. Yeah.
You said something, accomplishments or quoted accomplishments are not complete without appreciation.
Yeah.
I was just immediately thinking of college and the school system.
Yeah.
Personally, I really felt like there was no time to ever appreciate any of the work that you did, whether it was the schedule of school, just the kind of burden that was placed on you as a student. And I was wondering if you see that in your, even the fact of graduating and just going immediately into the workforce. Not looking at like, oh my gosh, I just studied all these things for 4 years. And I was just wondering, if you've seen that, what that effect might have, because I'm thinking of alienation, the same kind of things that you just brought up, depression, nihilism on the rise. You see that? Is that connected?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I talk to my students about the importance of Sabbath or leisure, that we need to sort of carve out a space in our life. So I'm obviously at a Jesuit institution where, there's some, because it's a religious institution, there's some kind of language you can draw upon, and people go on like Ignatian retreats. So St. Ignatius was, the founder of the Jesuits. And so there's sort of a practice of that, at least it's sort of encouraged, in the university. So maybe a little different, but even I think students at Creighton, I mean, everyone's like super busy, their schedule's filled up, and like, oh, it'd be nice to have a break, and I find this in my own life. I mean, I have 4 kids, and like it's hard to get a job in academic philosophy, and then you want to get tenure, it's just like push, and it's hard to like have a break, right? So I'm Catholic, so I go to mass with my family, but is the rest of my Sunday, or if one was Jewish, I think Christians in particular aren't very good at the Sabbath. It's hard to keep. Actually, I had a Jewish friend, one of my teachers in grad school. I said, if I wasn't Catholic, I might be Jewish, but just because I have an attraction to the practice. Like actually setting in a sense, no, he said, no, you don't want to do that. It's hard, it's like, but if you see it as like the most important thing, if it's not just a break. I mean, so I think we often think of leisure as just like, as I said, like, I think students see it as like, they use this phrase Netflix and chill, which I think actually has some like sexual connotation, I don't know, I haven't picked up on it totally, but I've heard the students say that. Anyways, I don't, that's not leisure, that's not actually Sabbath, right? And so I think we do need to find a place where I think this sort of hurried life will focus completely on, I think we're an incredibly status obsessed culture. There's a book that came out kind of with the Ivy Leagues called Excellent Sheep about, I think there's an article in Atlantic too, sort of a snippet out of it, whereas like all these Ivy League students are all depressed and suicide, all suicide, but like pretty alarming kinds of statistics about kind of their mental health. is because this sort of pressure to perform. I mean, it's like the status anxiety is super strong. How do we sort of lessen that, right? I mean, part of it, I think it's a restructuring of values, right? Like what's most important. I think, you know, if we're obsessed with sort of achieving some, you know, coming into some elite sector of society, and, you know, whatever those, you know, like I think we need to, you know, as Nietzsche would say, reevaluate our values, not in the way Nietzsche does, but in the way I'm suggesting. I think that would be a big help. But yeah, I'm all that. I see that with my students as well. I think that's a huge issue. Yeah.
You're in the which department?
Philosophy department.
Philosophy. Now, we technical graduates.
Yeah.
We look down their noses at.
Oh no.
The question of how well received are psychology, philosophy courses in colleges today, and how easy is it as it used to be envisioned? Because your book is not going to be an easy course that you teach the course from that book.
Yeah.
As I see it from here.
Yeah.
So is that new or is it still an easy course?
So the book has emerged. The book has emerged by with my teacher. So it is informed by the conversation. Yeah, so at Creighton, being a Jesuit school, we still have 4 students to take philosophy classes. It used to be that they had to take 6. Now it's down to like 2.5, 2, 3. I mean, it's basically 2.5 because they can choose. So I think we're all philosophers. The pitch I give is that you can't not but be a philosopher. There's an academic discipline, but there's philosophy as sort of the human quest for wisdom. It begins with wonder at the world. Aristotle says philosophy begins with wonder, which sounds nice, but it's actually more like, it says, it's really something more like being like deeply perturbed because we're at a loss in the world. We're trying to sort of figure things out. Philosophy arises when we confront questions that we're sort of bothered by, that we don't understand. And so then we see, and then we seek wisdom or holistic understanding. So philosophy, as you may know, comes from the Greek term meaning the love of wisdom. We often talk in my first day of class, like, what is wisdom, right? How is it different than knowledge, for instance, right? Or even, and there's different kinds of knowledge, like technical knowledge, right? There's other scientific knowledge and so forth, right? What is wisdom? What makes it different than knowledge, right? Well, it's some way of seeing the big picture, seeing how it all fits together, but it also has a practical component that wisdom is found in living it out, that it's about living the good life. So I think we're all sort of, as I say, philosophers in the making, that it's part of being human. The goal is to sort of engage in it and reflect upon it. Now, again, there's always a challenge. You want to, sounds like I hear a slight critique that maybe wasn't entirely clear. Sorry about that. I had to rush through. I was trying to give a sense of the book, but that's okay too, because I think life is confusing, and sometimes it's good to just to kind of lay out a picture, a framework, right? And we may not understand every part of it. You can buy the book and then see if it makes see if it makes more sense. But I think the struggle is part of the process. So my students seem to, not saying I went over all of them, but I would say went over the large majority of them, and they think they see the value in it. And we're glad that they were forced to do it, right? This goes to show we should always choose, right? We shouldn't have unlimited choice. We need to be forced to do things at times that are to be a little paternalistic. We need to force people to do these things. But I think even in philosophy today, the discipline of philosophy, I think there has been a loss of the ancient vocation of philosophy to pursue wisdom. A lot of my work is trying to recover this sort of ancient, so I've referred a lot to Aristotle, right? So he's one of my philosophical heroes. But I really advocate for this ancient idea of philosophy as a way of life. It's not merely just an academic discipline. A lot of people, they took a philosophy class and maybe what they're familiar with is like tables and chairs and how do we know that they exist, right? And that kind of thing. So that's not, that's not all that riveting, or like, why is that relevant? Of course, it's a chair, right? Of course, it's a table. I mean, it's not to say the questions about knowledge, how do we know what we know, aren't important, right? But if we lose from the grand sort of enterprise and philosophy of living a good life and pursuing wisdom, then I think we've lost sort of the heart of the matter, right? So that's my pitch.
Thank you so much. As a token, we want to give you the whole world in your hand.
Thank you. A little Promethean, maybe. I got the whole world.
Where can people buy your book?
Yeah, Bill asked, where can people buy your book?
Is it on?
Is it on the bookstore?
It's coming out in December. It's not up online yet because partly because the proofs have to be in, and on Amazon, they get a preview, so the proofs have to be in before they can put it up. So it should go up on Amazon within the next month. If you were to so you could find my previous book, Virtue and Meaning, and another book called Spirituality and the Good Life: Philosophical Approaches. If you went on Amazon or just Googled David McPherson philosophy or David McPherson virtue and ethics or virtue and meaning, you can also find my website. But it's coming out. It's supposed to come out in December before Christmas. So and hopefully it'll be at an affordable price. It's always Oxford's a little better and it's a small book, so I'm hoping it'll be affordable. But if you need further follow-up, you can always shoot me an email. You can find both at the Benton Center, but also I have a Creighton address. I tend to check my Creighton one more than the Benton Center, just because, or the Colorado, the CU Boulder address. But thank you so much for coming. It's been great to be at a Rotary Club meeting.
We'll get this. And with that said, if it's Wednesday, it's Rotary. Thank you so much, everyone. Awesome.
Was it January?
Absolutely.
I figured you were the one I was.
Yeah, Terry, that's right. There's like a timeline in which.
Except philosophy wasn't my biggest.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I was really interested in.
Yeah, it's recorded. Let me turn off the recording.
I was more to be.
Oh,